Hello and welcome to the Nobel Series Webinar. I'm Vivek Chandran and I lead the transport program at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. It's a Delhi-based not-for-profit philanthropic organization that works towards the aim of a clean and secure energy future in India. I have the distinct privilege to be the moderator for this evening. So I will take you through the day and through the panel discussions. But to start with, as many of you may know, the Volvo Bus India is a part of the Volvo Escher Commercial Vehicles Group, and it has been organizing the Nobel Series Webinar since 2009 under the patronage of the Swedish ambassador. In organizing the latest edition, the Volvo Escher Group seeks to take forward the agenda of fostering and promoting sustainable mobility by facilitating discussions and collaboration among important public transport stakeholders. The topic of today and today's discussion is sustainable funding for sustainable public transport from a user perspective. And so what we will do is quickly go over what our priorities, how our priorities are emerging in the sector at this point. If you look at bus transport in India, it is, in comparison to global standards, it's still behind. India has about one bus per 1,000 people in India, whereas countries outside are closer to 4 to 5 per 1,000 people. Our studies have also shown that demand for public transport in India is going to rise as incomes increase and people are required to travel more. We see almost a 4 to 5 time increase in public transport need over the period from 2010 to 2050. And in the past, structural concerns, policy challenges have prevented the scale-up of bus-based public transport, but the scenario is improving as we speak. New policy measures have come about that have strengthened public-private partnership in transport service and also increased the availability of transport through the national permit scheme for buses. And there's, of course, transformational changes occurring in the business itself through new business models that have emerged, largely aided through the information technology changes itself. While these changes are occurring, while these transformations have occurred, public transport still requires strong funding. And that continues to remain a major challenge, which is why it is the focus of today's discussion. With the emergence of new business models, public transport service provision requires alternate sources of finance. And that would help us meet the developmental goals of the nation. So today we have an incredible set of panelists who will bring perspectives from a range of vantage points as an OEM, from a state transport undertaking, trade organizations, bus operators, and of course, financial institutions themselves. So before we jump into the panel discussion itself, I would like to invite the deputy head of the mission at the Embassy of Sweden in New Delhi, Mr. Gautam Bhattacharya, to deliver the inaugural address. Mr. Bhattacharya is an economist by training and has previously been posted at the Swedish Embassy at Santiago in Chile and in Delhi itself, apart from serving at the International Trade Policy and Human Resources Departments of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vivekji, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll start by addressing, of course, the honoratioris, Mr. Vinod Agarwal, MD and CEO, Volvo Eicher Commercial Vehicles, Mr. Akash Passe, President Bus Division, Volvo Eicher Commercial Vehicles, Mr. Cecilia Oskarsson, Trade Commissioner of Sweden to India, and I understand Mr. Biju Prabhakar might not be with us yet, Secretary Transport Department, Government of Kerala, Mr. Prasanna Patwagan, President of Bus Operators Confederation of India, Mr. Amit Mohan, Joint President, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Mr. Leonardo Negro, whom we hope to welcome to India eventually, Managing Director of Volvo Financial Services, and you, Mr. Vivek Chandran, Associate Director, Shakti Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted and honored to be here this afternoon under the aegis of the Embassy's annual Sweden-India Nobel Memorial Week. And as Vivekji was saying, we have been celebrating this week since 2008. In fact, when I was here on my last posting, that was the last thing I did was to prepare the first edition of the Nobel Memorial Week, and I'm happy that it has survived, and we are really extremely honored that Volvo Eicher has taken this initiative to organize this event under the Nobel Week. The Nobel Week highlights innovation and innovators from both Sweden and India, and since the first Nobel Prize was awarded in 1901, you're all aware that the Nobel brand has become synonymous with the spirit of research and innovation. Innovation lies at the heart of the Indo-Swedish partnership. And as some of you might know, Sweden and India agreed on a joint innovation partnership in 2018, in April, when Prime Minister Modi visited Stockholm and signed a joint innovation partnership with the then Swedish Prime Minister, Mr. Stefan Löfven, who 3 weeks ago stepped down to give place for our new Prime Minister, Ms. Magdalena Andersson, Sweden's first female Prime Minister, we should also add. So there's been a change in government since then. But this partnership was further cemented during the state visit of Their Majesties the King and Queen of Sweden to India in December 2019, 2 years ago. Feels like an eternity considering what has happened since December 2019. But the innovation partnership has become, over time, really the mainstay, I would say the signal of the Indo-Swedish relationship. Without exaggerating, I would say that Sweden is today one of India's top 3 partners in the innovation sphere. And our ecosystems have come closer through a series of joint calls between our various funding agencies. And so I would say that innovation is really the flavor of Sweden-India relations. And it underlines our mutual commitment towards prosperity, addressing global challenges such as climate change and fostering sustainable development through innovation. One of the areas in which Sweden and India have been collaborating particularly closely, and I've seen it grow during my 5.5 years here at the embassy, is sustainable and safe transport. The Sweden-India Transport Innovation and Safety Partnership, called CITIS, comprises companies and institutions that are leaders in the transport sector and safety sector. CITIS was launched in 2020 in the presence of the Swedish Minister for Infrastructure, Mr. Thomas Eneroth, and the Indian Minister of Road Transport and Highways, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, in connection with the Global Ministerial Conference on Road Safety in Stockholm. While Minister Gadkari has declared his vision to make the Indian automobile industry #1 in the world for electric vehicles within 5 years, our Minister Eneroth has expressed his strong commitment to accelerate electrification of transport sector in Sweden. To give you an example, the city of Stockholm has recently announced its goal to have 100% electrical buses in the public transport system by 2035. State governments, as Vivekji was mentioning, state governments in India and various authorities in India are taking similar steps towards decarbonization of the public transport system. So we really see there's clear room for deepened collaboration between Sweden and India in this area. Now, Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles, the VCV, has proven to be sort of our marquee brand. It's a brilliant example of how Sweden and India can get together and create something. 1 + 1 is 3. VECV is one of the key players in the emerging field of electric mobility in India as we go along. And the joint venture is often being described as a textbook example of how Swedish and Indian companies can combine their strengths to create green and profitable solutions. Now, a prerequisite for any large investment, and it goes without saying for today, in sustainable solutions is appropriate financing. The topic of today's discussion, sustainable funding for sustainable public transport, is therefore very pertinent. And I'm personally very proud that Sweden offers a very comprehensive government-backed export credit system, which actively promotes green solutions. During a recent trip to Sweden, and I will let Cecilia maybe speak more about it, Ambassador Molin, who sends his regards to you, is indisposed today, but he and Trade Commissioner Oskarsson met the Director General of the Swedish Export Credit Agency, EKN, as well as the CEO of the Swedish Export Credit Corporation, SEK, and had a fruitful discussion on the importance of financing solutions for enhanced trade between the countries. And I would just like to conclude this by saying that our agencies in Sweden is very open to looking at various financing solutions with Swedish and Indian actors and to take a sustainable agenda forward. So with these few words, let me just conclude by saying I look forward to listening to all of you and hope we'll have a fruitful deliberation this afternoon. Thank you very much, and back to you, Vivekji.
Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. It's heartening to hear the different aspects in which you're working and progressing the area of finance itself. I would like to next go to Mr. Vinod Agrawal, the Managing Director and CEO of Volvo Commercial Vehicles Limited, to deliver the keynote speech. Mr. Agrawal has been leading the Volvo Eicher Commercial Vehicles group since 2010, and he's also the non-executive member of the board of directors at Eicher Motors. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar. I think before I start, I think we should welcome Mr. Biju Prabhakar. I can see his name. I believe sir has joined. Have you joined, Mr. Biju Prabhakar?
Maybe his office has switched it on for him to come.
Okay. Okay. So let me start. Your Excellency, Mr. Gautam Bhattacharya, Deputy Head of the Mission, Cecilia Oscarsson, Trade Commissioner of Sweden to India, and of course, I believe Mr. Biju Prabhakar, either he joined or expected to join soon, Secretary, Transport Department, Government of Kerala, and CMD, Kerala State Road Transport Corporation, Mr. Prasanna Patwagan, President, Bus Operators Confederation of India, Amit Mohan, Joint President, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Mr. Leonardo Negro, Managing Director, Volvo Financial Services, and Vivek Chandran, Shakti Foundation, and of course, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I can see almost more than 100 participants here. On behalf of We Commercial Vehicles, it is indeed an honor for me to add my welcome to the patrons' address. The old saying, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. This is the most relevant today. The consequences of climate change, economic and social inequity, and pollution are devastating and impact us all. The theme of this Nobel Memorial Week, to promote sustainability, has never been more relevant and apt. As India prospers economically, we in the transportation industry have to play a very, very responsible role to secure environmentally sustainable ways to transport goods and people, to scale it up qualitatively as well as quantitatively. Much work is ongoing at the government and private sector levels in this regard, be it policy changes, for example, scrappage policy, the accelerated adoption of global emission norms, currently BS6, step 1, step 2 is going to come in next 2 years, use of alternate fuels like CNG and biomass, biofuels, or flexi fuels, and of course, electric vehicles. I applaud the dynamic policies of the Government of India and many state governments that are championing this change. As you are aware, We Commercial Vehicles is a joint venture between Volvo Group and Eicher Motors. We are in operations since 2008, and of course, now we have completed more than 13 very, very successful years of this joint venture. And our businesses, they span the entire range of trucks and buses, both Eicher branded as well as Volvo branded. Then we have We Powertrain division, where we are exporting Euro 6 engines to Volvo Group. So this is one of the finest examples of Make in India, when we are exporting engines which are made in Pithampur plant to all over the world. And then, of course, we have the components business, where again we export components to US and Europe and few other countries. And of course, recently we integrated Volvo Bus India into VCV. So basically this joint venture is going from strength to strength, and this represents the joint interests of Sweden as well as India. So it's a very, very fine example of joint venture partnerships. And our vision is to be recognized as industry leaders in driving modernization in commercial transportation in India and the developing world. And we have taken a lot of steps in pursuing our vision. For example, we are now selling 100% of our vehicles, trucks or buses, which are connected. So 100% of the vehicles are connected. And of course, we provide a lot of digitalization or online services since all these trucks are connected. In keeping with the theme today, I will focus more on people transport. As a leading producer of buses, we commercial vehicles is heavily involved in reshaping the future of the bus industry through the Eicher and Volvo brands in India. Over the past years, we have partnered with many of you in this conference to drive sustainable initiatives with leading state government undertakings, state transport undertakings like TSRTC, leading members of BOCI, financiers like Volvo Finance, International Finance, financial institutions, or Kotak Mahindra Finance, or institutions like EKN and SEK from Sweden, and many more. The theme this year is particularly interesting: sustainable funding for sustainable public transport, a user perspective. It focuses on an area which is often neglected by policymakers and stakeholders. While progressive policies as well as meaningful public and private partnership have helped to boost the sector, the role of assured life cycle financial support is critical as a force multiplier. In an increasingly integrated world, a number of attractive alternate sources of finance, including green funds, are coming to the fore to complement traditional channels. I'm sure in today's discussions, we will have much more focus on this very, very important area. And I look forward to hearing the panelists' perspectives in the meeting today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Agarwal. I would next like to...
Now, of course, we can see Biju Purvakarji. Namaskar, Vinod Agarwal, and very warm welcome.
Welcome, sir. So thank you, sir. Thank you for opening up the discussion itself and laying out some of the key aspects of how bus-based public transport is evolving in our country. I think next we will jump into the panel discussion itself. Once the panel discussion is over, we will have some time to take audience questions. And therefore, I would request the audience to raise their questions in the chat box. If you'd like any specific speaker to address your questions, please also mention that. So before I start the panel discussion itself, I think it would be useful to for the panelists to reflect on a couple of areas that we would like to look into. One, of course, is the fact that bus transport and public transport in India is transforming, and the transformation is in business models. It's in how the user is responding to these business models and using it, and hence the change in demand itself. So that is one. And once in that context, please position your interventions into how finance can respond. Innovative new alternative ways of finance can respond to these new requirements. And to start off this discussion, I would first like to invite Mr. Akshay Pase, the president of the bus division at Volvo Eicher Group itself. And Mr. Pase is the founding president of the bus division at Volvo Eicher Group. It's a joint venture, of course, between Volvo Group and the Eicher Motors Limited itself. Prior to taking up his assignment here, he was the senior vice president at the Volvo Bus Corporation. He's also run businesses not only in India, but also in Sweden and Singapore. So he brings a vast array of experience. Over to you, Mr. Akash. What we will also do is please take 5 to 6 minutes for your intervention, and then we will pass it on to the next panelists, and then we will go into question and answer after everyone has completed. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vivek. First of all, good afternoon and namaskar to everyone here. Excellency, the Deputy Head of the Mission, and Mr. Vinod Agarwal, I thank both of you for your keynote address and speech to us. I would also like to welcome all our customers across India, and as well as both from the governmental representations and private customers, financiers, NGOs, etc., who have participated here today. So from my point of view, ladies and gentlemen, in general, since the Nobel Week was started with the help and under the umbrella of the Swedish Embassy, we have come a long way since 2008. Over the last year or two, as Vivek said, COVID took us a little bit back, and especially took our industry many miles behind from where we actually were, due to people stopping to travel in buses. So therefore, from that perspective, it is really heartening to see that we are now, not only through these seminars, but also with some startup or face-to-face activities, exchanging and getting back to looking forward to normal business coming over soon. So I think, Vivek, the topic of the day from my point of view, being in this business along with my colleagues for a long time, is very appropriate, because given the fact that public transport needs to be back on its feet, whether in the city part or the long distance part, financing today seems to be it's not a showstopper, but more or less it is, in customers really going back, both on the governmental side as well as on the private side, for being able to come back into the market and put in public transport vehicles, and in our case now with the induction into VECV with two strong brands of Volvo as well as Eicher on the front engine bus side. So I think our challenge today, as I look at it, is that, and you said that China, which is the nearest country equivalent in size, has probably 6 to 7 times more buses per 1,000 people than what we have for our traveling public in India. Last mile connectivity is a bit of a challenge, although the scenario is improving with the government bringing in proactive policies, with the national permit cutting in, and the public-private partnership gaining more grounds. So there are also structure and policy changes, but at the same time, some of these policies also are preventing the scale-up of bus-based systems, especially in the city transport arena. We see that when we go in this technological change from diesel to either alternative fuels like CNG or electric, scaling is what the government is pushing, but that is an area where we need to scale up in many parts, and financing is one of the key areas which really will help up to scale to a new level, and that today remains a bit of a challenge. But hopefully from this panel discussion, I do believe that we will find some solutions or have some thoughts which we could work on. Because today, bus transport or public transport is unfortunately not considered as having an infrastructure status, which is probably true in, let's say, metro rail. But in the bus system today, an operator goes and picks up money at the normal prevailing market rates of about 8 to 12%, which in itself creates a large bottleneck, given the fact that the buses of tomorrow with new technology like electric and CNG coming in, are rightfully so, having more features, having new technology, are much more expensive, in the range of 50 lakhs to 1 crore or more than that. And financing, therefore, is a big ticket item, which becomes a very large part of the cost, even if it's available at high rates of 8 to 12%. Therefore, I think for us at Volvo, and now also working with Aisha Solutions, we've been very much looking with international solutions, maybe development banks or government-to-government frameworks on financing, or ECBs or debt funds, or many a times we have worked on business models, which was covered also then by Mr. Gautam Bhattacharya, working with the help of either Business Sweden or Sweden India Business Council with the EKN or SEK out in Sweden to bring attractive financing. Till now, that's been a bit of a challenge, but given the fact that we have learned and we are learning to live with COVID, we need to therefore move to the next step and make grounds for such an important area as financing to be available for us to be able to scale up and bring in modern transport solutions based on both Volvo and Eicher into the foreground with different technologies. For the moment, I'll leave it at that, Vivek. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pase. You make some important points already about where finance could flow in from. I'll definitely take you up on some of those a little later. Next, I would like to invite Cecilia Oskarsson, who is the Trade and Investment Commissioner of Sweden. Cecilia brings over 20 years of hands-on international experience in both public and private fields. She was earlier the general manager of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, both in Singapore and in India. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me for this. So I see we have a lot of listeners here who might not know exactly what Business Sweden is doing. So let me start by just explaining that a little bit. We are here to really expand Swedish export and also to increase the investment into Sweden. And we do this by shortening the time to market, but also find new revenue streams and minimize the risk for our clients or customers or the companies that we are advising. So we see ourselves as enablers, but also connectors, as well as business development. So we are partly owned by the Swedish government, hence the government hat, and partly owned by Swedish businesses. So this gives us a unique mandate when we operate. We do have a role to play in the increasing bilateral trade and business collaborations between countries, and we act as a connector between government and companies, as well as academia. And we work in all sectors, but mobility is certainly one of the most prioritized ones. And we have already conducted multiple projects globally for Volvo Group, but also Volvo Eicher and Volvo Cars in the mobility sector. If I were to mention a few, I can mention the non-fossil fuel assessment, such as hydrogen fuel and e-mobility, sustainable logistics systems, or the funding in China and Northeast Asia, where we identified the right investors supporting in building an investment case and providing support across the deal life cycle. So we have an excellent network of subject matter experts and financial institutions, both locally here in India, but also in Sweden and globally. You mentioned a few earlier, EKN and SEK, but also Swedfund. We also have in our local innovation center worked with a few private equity funds enabled to raise money for the fast-moving scale-ups. So at Business Sweden, we have an ability to help assess and find financing solutions and for various initiatives, both for the public, but also for the private sphere. So again, I'm coming back to this role as a connector and a driver. And this is thanks to our private-public partnership character. If we go back to Volvo Eicher, we have recently done a financing study in order to understand the different financial options for Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles customers, the bus operators. And in this, my team concluded that apart from commercial loans, there are other options. I can mention external commercial borrowings, both in rupees, but also in foreign currency, and even masala bonds. I can also mention foreign currency non-residential loans. But what's more also interesting is to see that most important for the borrowers are actually the rate or the interest rate, so the cost of the loans. This is followed mainly by quantum of funding. I think I will stop there and let somebody else speak for a while.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I think you did mention there's a study that you undertaken on a few of these itself. Perhaps we could get you to reveal more of it later on during the Q&A itself.
Yes.
Thank you. I will go to the next panelist. This is an honor to call upon the chairman and managing director itself of the Kerala State Road Transport Undertaking, Mr. Biju Prabhakar. He is from the Indian Administrative Services, and he's also the Secretary of Transport, the Devasam Board, and the Social Justice Departments at the Government of Kerala. Over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me for this sustainable funding for the sustainable public transport. The sustenance of public transport is the dilemma of the COVID situation. Especially the government of India policies are also not very conducive for the public transport system, especially the transport systems owned by the states, state transport undertakings. Now there are real kind of innovations which are coming from the government of India side in the way of the aggregator license, or in a way of giving national permit to the contract carriers. But this will not solve our problems, especially the public transport problems. Traditionally, if you look at the state transport undertakings, none of the state transport undertakings anywhere in the country is making profit. Basically, because of so many plethora of issues which has never been addressed. Every state look at state transport undertaking as an opportunity for employment, with the result that most of the states, at least 50–60% of the states of India, the human resources component is much higher than what is actually. Second is the Road Transport Workers Act. That also stipulates certain kind of conditions which has been formed in the way back in the 1950s, which is also very much essential, which mandates that there should be more human resources. There has not been any attempt to restructure that entire state transport undertaking, to introduce professionalism, to introduce intelligent management system, to introduce cleaner assets. Very few states in India is actually going towards electric vehicles because of the flaws of the pay-to system, pay-to policy of the government. Because which itself says that unless you pay 60 rupees per kilometer, you will not get the demand. So it is again not in the for the furtherance of the public transport system, rather it is for the furtherance of the business or the business of introducing more. Kerala, we are now going to for a restructuring of the area. We are in fact talking to, because already Tamil Nadu has obtained a loan from the German bank of KfW I think around 220 million euros for the entire restructuring. We are also going in for that. Unless that kind of a restructuring is done with the state transport undertaking, the public transport system, its efficiency is not going. We cannot have a private operator who are operating purely on the basis of the profit, especially when it comes to the connection to the remote areas, tribal areas, those areas where there is no economic feasibility, financial viability. So it's not possible. So this kind of a restructuring we are doing. Definitely, if time permits, in my later part of the talk, I will just give a glimpse of because the time does not permit to have a detailed percentage on this. But we are going to replace the entire fleet of nearly 3,000, 4,000 buses, either into CNG and for the city services to the electric vehicles, low-range electric vehicles. That requires a huge investment of somewhere around 300 million euros, which we are trying to get a 0% loan for a period of 15 to 20 years. Of course, with sovereign guarantee. We are in talks with the media. Media has already promised us to find the funds necessary for this. So it has to be overall, without which it's not the question of the immediate. You can wind up any competition, no issue. Any state transport undertaking can be rolled up. But that is going to create a large void in the public transport system. Because when I talked to the National Highway Authority of India chairman, I told him, sir, unless you reduce the cost for the National Highway, the National Highway for the public transport, what will happen? This will begin just remuneration, and with the result that in the next 10-15 years, your entire National Highway, whatever makes the without and the straightness of the National Highway, all these are going to be clogged with the private personal vehicles. People, when there is a good road, people will tend to buy, for example, in Trivandrum to Kannagam, the nearest two cities. If the roads are really good, I will prefer to travel. I can afford to do that. I will prefer to travel in a car. So, with the result that the entire roads, the national highway, whatever investment we are making, that's going to be there. So there are heavy investment in the public transport sector, especially in the estimates has to be done by the government of India. And we definitely welcome initiative from the state side because the Kerala government has already, within a few years back, tied up with the TES of Switzerland to have a manufacturing or a semi-knockdown or a fully knockdown facility for assembling electric vehicles in our workshops, because our requirement is around 300 to 3,000 to 3,500 electric vehicles in the long term. So that was also there. So any initiative from any industry or the financiers, it's welcome because that alone will already change the scenario. Thank you very much. And dealing with the other points, if some specific questions are there, if I have given next chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I could not agree with you anymore. You're certainly correct that we have various kinds of objectives with public transport, and the vulnerable communities are some of the first priorities for the state. Absolutely. So we will, when we're looking at lowering cost of finance, it does enable increased access, which is a very, very important objective for us. We will go over to the next panelist, Mr. Prasanna Patwagan. He has a variety of experience from being the chairperson and managing director of Prasanna Group itself, group of companies, more than 3 decades, if I'm not wrong, of experience operating buses and transport services. He is also the president of the Bus Operators Federation of India. And so comes with not just experience of his own, but also experience of his community in providing bus services. So over to you, sir, to make your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Vivek, and thank you, VC, for giving me this opportunity. So at the outset, I would like to say that BOKI is an organization which represents about 92% of the vehicles or buses in this country. We have more than 20,000 operators operating these buses, and buses are somewhere around 17 lakh. All this sector is totally unorganized, and it is very important to look at 92% equal to 8%. So both are not being looked after by our country, and that is why we are in the situation, what situation is today. So first thing is, in case of priorities, all our priorities, whatever we talk, all our priorities are towards private mobility rather than public mobility. So starting from legal framework, if you look at, there are some, I would say, discrimination when vehicles are even categorized on the basis of safety. So commercial vehicle, even if it is Volvo or Mercedes or any high-end vehicle, it cannot go beyond 80 kilometers per hour, however good highways you build. And private vehicle, whether it is a low-end vehicle like say Hyundai or Maruti or Alto or whatever lowest possible model, that can go at 120, 140 kilometers without any safety features in it. So that is the kind of discrimination what we have. So on one side, we expect people to travel by public transport. And on second side, we have all policies which are more inclined towards pushing people to private transport. If you take example of even these COVID times, first thing to be banned was public transport. So in a country wherein 85% of the people do not have their own vehicle, how they are expected to travel when you stop completely a public transport systems? Anywhere in traffic also, the first thing which is banned is bus and not private vehicles. And bus is banned because it congests the city. Very surprising. When you talk about per person road space occupied by car and per person space occupied by bus, there is a huge difference. So I always talk about when you take out one bus out of the road, you are adding at least 10 cars or 15 to 20 two-wheelers. And they occupy more road space only because they are scattered. We are used to look at size of the vehicle rather than size of per person. So that is the biggest challenge what we have. That is our first challenge. When it comes to public transport, in public transport, second example, in Delhi, diesel cars, private cars are allowed, but diesel taxis are not allowed. So there are so many things wherein you promote private mobility than public mobility. So this first discrimination, so priority needs to be first set up right, that we really want to promote public transport. So unless that priority is set right, once that priority is set right, laws will change, regulations will change, how people look at it will change, and then finance focus will also change. I have been attending a lot of seminars, and I'm very sorry to say, but in seminar, even financial institutions talk a lot about green fund, providing funding to public transport, etc., etc. But when it comes to funding, what funding we get? We get only vehicle funding, which is vehicle finance and not project finance. So when you are shifting from diesel bus to say electric bus or any hydrogen bus or that kind of system wherein you require funding for a system and you don't require funding only for the vehicle, but that is unavailable today. That is one. Second, that funding is given for 5 years with no moratorium, with high interest rate. So all this is making it really very, very difficult for operator to grow. So just to close my this first remarks, I would say there are a lot of things which we can do. First, we need to decide on our priority. Priority of building infrastructure, priority of having laws in place which are pro-public transport rather than pro-private transport. And third thing, when it comes to allocation of funds, most of our transport funds are going towards road building. So even if 20%, 15% or whatever of the percentage you decide, if that percentage goes towards building infrastructure which is useful for public transport, that would have huge impact. So first, infrastructure development, different laws. Second, infrastructure development and prioritizing finances. So if three things are kept in place, then everything would come back to normal and people will start traveling by public transport. Today, traveling by public transport is so cumbersome that people avoid traveling by public transport. And in COVID time, government has forced people to buy their vehicles because they want to attend their jobs. So without your own vehicle, you could not attend your job. So what kind of policies we are talking about which are pro-public transport? Thank you very much. I'm open for other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patwagan. It was very, very useful points that you bring up. It's certainly true that the operational cost of public transport is far more and outweighs the capital cost itself in a life cycle point of view. And certainly that's something to be focused on. Next, I would like to go to Mr. Amit Mohan. He is the Joint President, Kotak Mahindra Bank Limited, and he is also the Additional Director, Kotak Mahindra Prime Limited. He leads the commercial vehicles, dealer finance, and working capital businesses for logistics and warehousing segments at the bank. So he brings a great perspective from the finance institution itself. Mr. Amit is also a senior banking professional with more than 30 years of experience in retail, working capital, and lending in India. So over to you, sir, for your opening remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. I completely agree that public transport is key to sustainable economic development. So there is no argument to that. I also agree to Vivek, your opening remark that the bus penetration in India is so low that we have only the upside, which is available. So I agree with that comment as well. And I also have no doubt that the state governments who are pushing the public transport infra, basically to get the economic benefit unlocked over the next few years. So we've seen state governments aggressively pushing the public transport, infrastructure. We've also seen governments investing in alternate fuel technology and electric vehicle, as a kind of another pillar to the public transport. So I think there is some movement around this, and there is some movement in terms of sustainability part. And like we said that, we have this framework of ESG, wherein the environmental, social, and governance framework comes into when we talk about sustainability. So I think most of these aspects are being dealt with in some measure, today. However, whether that's good enough, I think probably much more is what is needed. Now, before I start with some of the points, I also see the kind of pain with which Mr. Prasanna has spoken about the plight of bus operators, and I agree with him. The sector has gone through a turmoil since the COVID. During the COVID, the sector has been impacted like never before, and the growth in NPAs have been extremely high. Even if that wasn't enough, COVID second wave pushed the recovery by further 6 months, and the prolonged lockdowns had its toll on the sector. And we've seen some of the customers with excellent track records, have shown their inability to pay the debt. Now that's fact of life. However, the good news is that the public transport and the tour and travel segments have recovered considerably. And while staff transportation and school bus operations are still impacted, but they're projected to fare better by April, May of 22. Some of the positives that have been the good vaccination penetration and the fact that now businesses have learned to live in this new normal world, or may I say the never normal world, So as the world has changed, shouldn't we change our outlook to the industry? Is the question that we need to answer. I'm sure the entire banking industry is looking at ways and means to support our customers, existing and new ones. And I believe the industry is ready for some serious discussion around the alternate sources of funding, whether it is OPEX, CAPEX, leasing, or equity. I think time has come when we need to address these issues because I think one should be mindful of thing that there are only limited number of experienced bus operators in India, and this bus operation requires an extremely unique skill set. You are moving people, you are moving human lives. So therefore, since there are limited number of experienced operators, we must come out with innovative solutions, to address that how they can grow their business and flourish. So those are my opening remarks, and we can probably take it once we move ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mohan. Fair point that it is time now that we look at new models of finance, but we'll certainly discuss that further during the discussion itself. And lastly, I would like to call upon the last panelist for today, Leonardo Negro. He is the Managing Director at Volvo Financial Services India. He's been with the Volvo Group for over 15 years now and has held the position of the Chief Finance Officer of VFS Canada, which is one of the largest portfolios globally for VFS itself. Before coming to India, he's been in India now for a year, holding the position of Managing Director, but prior to this, he is also the Managing Director at Peru. So he's seen different geographies and how bus transport has worked and commercial vehicles have worked there. So over to you, Mr. Negro.
Thank you very much, Vivek. Thank you for the kind introduction. Also, I'd like to extend my thanks to the VECV team, as well as the Swedish Embassy for the cordial invitation to allow me to participate in this event today, representing Volvo Financial Services. And for those of you that are not familiar with Volvo Financial Services, we are the captive finance company of the Volvo Group. We offer competitive financial solutions for in over 49 countries for Volvo Group customers. And here in India, we are established as an NBFC, and we have the opportunity and the pleasure not only to serve the Volvo Group customers, being Volvo Bus, Volvo Trucks, Volvo Construction Equipment, but also the Eicher customers through the Volvo and Eicher joint venture that it was spoken about earlier today. I believe it's a great moment to be in the financial services and in the captive industry today, as we're seeing a lot of new technology development, new innovations, and new collaborations, right, between, we call it fintechs and OEM, driving more technology and driving more ways of operating, right, which is leading to electric solutions, connected solutions. And for the most part, we're getting into a point where we're looking at equipment as a service, right? Which I think it's often alluded to as the life cycle financing of the buses itself, right? So I believe there's a great journey ahead of us that we're all going to be part of it and be major players in this new journey. But as Mr. Amit was just speaking now, I think before we even get there, we need to address the current situation, right, with our bus customers. And I want to acknowledge all of our customers that are here on this call today, which the past 18 months or so have not been easy, right, for the bus customers, the bus operators, and quite frankly, for us financiers as well, right? Our priority as an organization, as the Volvo and Eicher captive, has been to be working side by side with our customers throughout this period, right? And offering the moratorium with the guidelines by the RBI that was, for a good 6 months maximum. But even after that, right, we have been working on a one-to-one basis with our customers that are there, fighting the fight, struggling today to make ends meet, right? So we are, taking our own decisions and I would say, alone, right? Because there's not enough support out there. We're making the decisions alone to restructure some of those loans so that we can give some time for the customers to get back on their feet, right? So I think it's important to address that. And I am glad that we're having this dialogue here today, because we're all in this together, right? Being the OEM, being the financiers, being the customers, right? I think we're all part of the same chain, and when the chain is broken, it hurts all of us, right? But at the same time, we can all be part of the solution going forward. So I think this is a great forum for us to have these types of discussions with our customers in mind. And I fully agree with some of the comments that the panelists have already made upon financing as an infrastructure. I think we need to categorize in the future the financing of the life cycle as an infrastructure, and I think we'll get there eventually. We're seeing in other markets in Europe, for instance, that they're already building these types of schemes where they're financing equipment as a service, right? So that means that there's parts financing, that means there's insurance financing, services, everything being taken care of for the customer, and with always the customer in mind. So I think it's as I mentioned, it's a great moment to be a part of the captive finance, part of the OEM, part of the financial services industry, period. Because I believe we can do a lot for our customers and make some significant changes in the near future. So I'll pause that for now. Vivek, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Negro. It is very interesting to see that you're looking at the end-to-end services being financed in your product portfolio itself. This is something that is important and that we will need to look at going forward. So before opening up to the panel itself for questions, I just want to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please do leave them in the chat box, and we shall pick them up. I don't see too many questions, so I would like to encourage you to put in some of those questions. Do leave the name of the panelists that you would like to also have your questions responded by. And before I go into the panel discussion, a small correction I might have to make. I think earlier today when I introduced Mr. Akash, I probably said Akshay. And apologies for that, Akash. So let me go into the questions itself. And I'd like to start with Mr. Prabhakar, because I also know that he will have to leave soon. And so we'll probably take your time now, sir, immediately. So I think you did say that you are looking at restructuring a lot of the services in Kerala itself. You're also the Secretary of Transport, so you have a full view of how the laws work and how they are deployed in the state of Kerala. And what would be interesting for you to give us a glimpse of is, one, what is that restructuring? You did allude to it, and you did say that we can discuss that a little further. It would be nice for us to hear from you on that. And I have a second question, which is, how is the state looking at the new requirements, for example, of an escrow account that has come up now with how the government of India is looking at encouraging public-private partnership within STUs. So how has the experience of using escrow accounts gone? Is there any thought on providing a sovereign guarantee, for example, to private partners that you'll be working with? And of course, if there's any other thoughts on bringing in different kinds of funding, you did allude to the KFW development finance itself, but is there any thought on mainstreaming some of these? Over to you, sir.
I'll answer from the point of view as my general manager of the SRTC first, then as Secretary of Transport Secretary. The restructuring of KSRTC, because in this way it cannot be, because the skyrocketing price of diesel to the state access, it has gone up to 3 rupees, and with an average mileage of 3 to 4 kilometers, it will be around 30 to 40 kilometers, 30 to 40 rupees per kilometer. So these buses have to be switching over to cleaner fuels. Unfortunately, electric vehicles are still costly, so and the range is also very less. So for the present moment, we like to just go for CNG and even for the LNG. LNG, the government of India has already mentioned that it will be establishing some thousand LNG fuel outlets by 2024 and 36 lakh heavy vehicles will be on LNG by 2030, but the price of LNG has not yet been fixed, so that's a real issue. The CNG prices are also slightly skyrocketing just behind the diesel prices. So switching over to cleaner fuels, which will save around 40 crore rupees, 400 million rupees per month. That is one strategy of this. So the replacement of 4,000 buses into electric as well as executive staff, which we are looking at. Second, for running optimization of crew, optimization of which the maximizing the utilization of both the resources, crew as well as the fleet. What these details in the new transport management systems and the passenger information system and most of other IT solutions. So that will save around 40 to 50 crore rupees on one side. Second is that you cannot sustain this public transport system just by relying on the fare alone. So SRTC has around 5,000 crores worth of land. Any land anywhere in Kerala, that prime land belongs to SRTC. But unfortunately, that is not being managed. So we are looking at the long-term projects of 30 to 50 years on a BOT model for the construction of multiplexes, hotels, and that. So that are the two opportunities where financial services partners can come in and approach the restructuring of the entire fleet as well as the operations as well as hotels. From the transport secretary's point of view, the restructuring of the entire public transport system not only involved KSRTC. KSRTC has only 25% or 30% of the market share of the public transport system. It's already being operated by the private operators, and they have around 12,000 to 15,000 buses through the state. Replacing those fleets into CNG or even electric vehicles is also a priority. So there are so many financial institutions of government of Kerala which can definitely give subsidies or even subsidy for conversion of this. There also be required capital for it. Then when it comes to the multimodal connectivity, you cannot run a bus into the bylanes of a village or even inside the residential complexes. You require smaller vehicles which need to provide the feeder services or the last mile as well as the first mile connectivity. So that multimodal connectivity again all brought into a passenger information system that is also on it. So that will answer the first part of the question. Second, of course, any law taken by any of the government institutions is guaranteed by the government of Kerala. Because that is a normal practice, not with the government of Kerala, even by, and it requires the approval of the DA as well. There's we had a slight problem because already, if you look at any of the institutes anywhere in India, they have already escrowed to the consortium of banks or to the financial institutions already. So getting into a new escrow may be slightly problematic, but the sovereign guarantee will take care of it. This is what exactly is happening. Those loans which are outside the consortium banks, the government of Kerala, because the compliance we are unable to pay, the government of Kerala regularly pays that, so that the rating is not, rating of the government of Kerala as well as KSRTC is not going down. So that escrow is not possible, but the sovereign guarantee is possible, but it is as good as an escrow by the government of Kerala.
Thank you, sir. Just a clarification, perhaps maybe I was not clear in my question. I think the sovereign guarantee may kick in even more. The need for it may kick in even more because now we have the private player having to borrow on their own terms, right? And the visibility of the STU is not there in the kind of loans that they take. So, is there any method by which they're providing you a service, end-to-end service now, because GCC contracting is becoming the norm to an extent that becomes the way of looking at it. So what about the loans that they take? Eventually that cost is going to be borne by the STU, right? It will be passed on. But you can lower the cost of their borrowing itself by providing that sort of a guarantee because it reduces risk for the financial partner that they have chosen. Any thoughts on that, sir?
It will be slightly impossible for any government to provide the loans taken by a private company. But we can take a loan, we can finance them as subsidies. For example, for the in the case of electric auto rickshaws in Trivandrum city, we said that there is a 30,000 rupees subsidy on that. Earlier it was being given 30,000 rupees straight away to an auto rickshaw. What will happen? They will get 30,000 rupees and they will sell it off and they will get 15,000 margin on the new auto rickshaws. So now what we have done is that we have coupled that with the EMI payment. So if they pay one installment, we will pay the 1,000 rupees. So 30 installments we will pay along with their EMI payment, so that it will act as bonus like an escrow. And at the same time, the subsidy is given, which is linked with the payment by the private company. So in that case, we can work with that.
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And one more point. Of course, we are operating in the city services only in Trivandrum in a big way. All the 13 districts, we are going for a GCC model. We are waiting for the local proposal to come. Otherwise, we will have the application of the existing private buses in almost all the cities throughout the state, other than Trivandrum.
Certainly. Thank you, sir. I would next like to go to Mr. Patwagan. Sir, you, to an extent, you've heard the opening remarks from all of the panelists and also from Mr. Prabhakar just now. I would like to, could you open up on what are the various types of finance that you've been able to use? So also with the other private operators that you know of through the Confederation itself. So what are the different ways in which finance has been acquired, especially the new ones? Also your experience on how the escrow has gone with the GCC itself. It's been something that's pushed recently by the government. So what have those experiences been like? Especially if you have had any experience on, external commercial borrowings or even, private equity and debt being included in the mix. How does that, how has that played out, that experience?
So as far as financing is concerned, the present financing available to majority of the operators is only vehicle finance, hire purchase. Leasing is also not a good option because of GST repercussions on the costing. Apart from hire purchase, in hire purchase also now bank have started taking collaterals. So one vehicle is already mortgaged. On top of that, you need to do something extra. So you need to keep your house property or land or any property or fixed deposit as a collateral. So which is making it really difficult for operators to get any kind of finance. Private equity, though I have private equity in my own company, but till very recently, mine was the only company which could acquire that private equity. Otherwise, no private operator is having private equity. That's why I said when it comes to majority of the forums, what happens, all big green funds and even big institutions like say IFC or World Bank or KfW or ADB, they do not fund, excluding IFC, but they do not give any kind of fund to private operators. So that means 92% of the vehicles will not get funded by these banks, which are the biggest bank of the world. So there is no question that they give us direct money. So I was wondering why that is not possible. So we need to find out ways to make that possible. That is one. Second is equity also. There are multiple green funds, but green funds are also struggling to get good operator because it is mostly unorganized sector. So they also don't know in whom to invest. And that's why in some of the funds, if you see, they have started their own companies and they are bidding for the tenders. So existing operators are not getting any kind of support from either big banks or a structured funding like project finance. Suppose if I want to buy, say, electric buses, how do I buy my electric chargers? How do I develop my infrastructure, which is depot infrastructure, which I am supposed to invest when there is a PPP contract? In a contract which is floated by government, wherein I need to give a lot of bank guarantees. And how do I get money to keep it in the bank. So I need 100% margin money to keep it in the bank to get that bank guarantee. Then what benefit I am getting out of that grant, I don't know. Because my money is stuck up for 5 years under bank guarantee. And on the other side, I am getting that grant. So that grant is also not being very useful for private operators. So there are several issues when it comes to funding to private operators. First, it is only short-term finance, which is 5 years. Not more than 5 years, any bank or NBFC is willing to provide. Second, there is no project finance, so it is only vehicle finance. And third, there is no moratorium. So till the time you build your buses, they get just hardly 1 month moratorium, wherein for electric buses to put order and to get vehicle, it takes at least 6 months. So those kind of funding is also not suitable, because before I start my operations, my installment starts. So how do I move towards electric mobility? That is also a big challenge. And now under present circumstances, many of the operators, either they have become NPA or they are on the verge of becoming NPA. Under the condition, even if I get new contract, banks are not willing to fund me because there is some RBI norm which comes into the way. Restructuring, whatever RBI has offered, only to the extent of loans which are up to 50 crores. So we have made request to RBI to increase that limit from 50 crores to 500 crores. One bus like Volvo bus is costing 1 crore. So if I have only 50 buses, my exposure is, or 100 buses, my exposure is more than 50 crores. So how do I get benefit of that restructuring? Other restructuring which banks are willing to do, if I take that restructuring, they categorize me as NPA and then give me restructuring. Then what is the use? So I will not be able to take fresh funding till my old loans are repaid. So there are a lot of issues when it comes to actual funding private operators. And I am saying this for almost all the operators are in the same boat, barring very few operators, those who are supplying their buses to manufacturing sector, wherein that sector is little bit affected. It is not affected to the extent of other sectors. When it comes to escrow, what you were explaining, see, unless STU themselves are self-sufficient, have money, have enough funding, that escrow is of no use. I have seen, in spite of having escrows, we are not getting paid because there is no money. And unless there is money, where they are going to pay? So if they are bleeding by themselves, how they are going to pay me? So unless government gives them money, that escrow mechanism is also not useful. And in a big organization like Kerala or any state transport undertakings, keeping different escrows is also a challenge. So how many escrows you can create? And how do you differentiate between revenues which are coming from different services? So first, government needs to strengthen STUs to ensure that they pay private operators on time. Otherwise, whatever other mechanisms you find out, that will not be useful. So getting funding is difficult, getting money is also difficult.
Thank you, sir. I do understand the point on the STU needing to create revenue streams itself, absolutely. As well as a lot of the points that you alluded to earlier on are within the rules and regulations. There are many minor points that need to really be changed. But it's good to hear that you're already in discussion with the RBI on the loans. But I'll just go back to Mr. Prabhakar because I do know, sir, you have a limit on your time. There's an important point that came up right now. One is on the ability to raise revenue on the side of the STU itself. I do understand on, for example, in Bangalore, there was a 1% surcharge on property tax that was added to raise money for sustainable transport. But also on the other side, and this is more from your role as a Secretary Transport and perhaps a conversation you may be having with the central government on what the status of bus transport could be as an infrastructure itself, because that dramatically can bring down costs in borrowing itself. So these 2 points, sir.
Non-fare revenue, I told you it's slightly difficult because if you charge it very heavily, passengers will definitely leave the public transport system. So we are exploring the possibility because our next budget is coming out. France has a system whereby the employees of large organization activity, which employ more than 20% or more, will have to pay the transport cess. Similar kind of even the congestion tax. Congestion tax nowhere in India, as I understand, is possible. And there is also a possibility of even raising some kind of a cess over the, because Singapore has that kind of a strict system whereby you have a registration fee, which will be very, very high. You can definitely engage because those persons who are going for new vehicles, they are going for big investment in the vehicle while at the time of purchase of the vehicle. So these are the avenues which we are looking. But there is a low-hanging fruit with the KSRTC is that KSRTC has managed land, and if that is monetized, not by selling off as the government does, but just by giving it on a lease for DOT projects for a period of 30 to 50 years, it's not the principle has already agreed. We are in the process of identifying the transaction at various states, and in almost all the cities, because of the dense population and high urbanization of labor, there is a tremendous potential for all those kind of investments. We are going for it.
Thank you. So actually, we had recently done a study for MSRTC as well, and APSRTC and many others. And we did realize that land, because once you do the long-term projections, you really understand what the utility of that land is. Otherwise, we're always wondering what the next purpose of that land is going to be. Maybe I have to build a depot, maybe I have to build a terminal. But once that long-term growth projections are made, it's quite evident that we are perhaps sitting over land that we don't need at this point or will not use for operations itself. And absolutely, we could monetize them and raise revenue from there. Sorry, you were saying something.
Vivek, in fact, we have to look at the Hong Kong model where totally the land is monetized. Even their oyster card. We are coming up with our own card, but the RBI restrictions put us restrictions on the use of this card for other commercial transactions. So oyster card of Hong Kong has gone up to such a level that it can finance it has become an independent company and it can finance all these things. So that revenues will have to just the Delhi model, if you look at somebody says that it's not a right model, you are right, giving it free of cost to the ladies. But I suggest that that is the right model because it has to be as cheap as possible. Then only public will because it should be cheaper than the bikes of the country. It should be cheaper than the expenses for the bikes. Then only people will migrate from the bikes to the buses. So that has to be subsidized in some non-fair way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
So, Vivek, can I say something here?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I think it is question of priority. Government has money. When it comes to metro, actually a lot of money is being pumped in. And in one metro, you can buy literally thousands of buses. And in one viability gap funding, you can fund those buses throughout the year. It's a question of priority. When it comes to metro, you get 30 years finance. Then you get at 2%, 1%, or whatever that percentage may be. They get a lot of land to capitalize on that land. So ways are found out to raise funds, if at all, if any city wants to have metro. So similarly, firstly, let me say that I am not against metro. So metro is required, but only metro is not essential. Metro is like icing on the cake. But if you do not have cake, what do you do with that only icing? So you need buses first. So you need to fund in holistic manner rather than looking at only one mode of travel. So you spend on roads when it comes to road transport, and when it comes to metro, you fund the system. So in the road also, you need to fund the system. Bus system or part of public transport. Because as I said, 85% people do not have their vehicles. So they want something to go from point A to point B, and that only can be provided by public transport. So public transport also needs to be funded well, like how you fund roads and metros.
Certainly, I think that's the ask of infrastructure status for bus transport itself would lead to that step being taken. But certainly, sir. I'd like to go to the other side of the equation, which is on the finance providers themselves, right? So, Mr. Mohan, you have you know what the Indian scenario is like, and you have seen you are into commercial finance itself. Some of the points that were raised here today have focused on the need for life cycle finance. Has also looked at the fact that we need to look at innovative ways of financing, which is perhaps to bring in finance, lower cost finance, which is outside of the country, but enable that to come into the country itself. So have you been looking at any of these options? Have you been looking at any of these new ways of financing buses themselves? Over to you, sir.
Yeah. So Vivek, before I get into that, I would like to spend a minute on what are the reforms that are required. Say today we say finance is central. Is financier central to the entire scheme of things? My question is that. We have, say, for example, we have straight road transport corporations, we have OEMs on the other side, we have operator on the other side, and there is a financer. All the four stakeholders are working disjointly. So they are not working in tandem. So they don't understand each other's needs. That's the problem number one. And why I'm saying that is that today, when tendering happens, the pricing is L1. And suddenly you get, people who are from, various backgrounds unrelated to bus operations, getting a L1. What will happen? Somebody will fund them and they will default because it is a disjointed system. Why are we not saying that other than the price, the experience, the fleet size, all these are given weighted averages, and these are part of the L1 consideration. Now that's a reform. See, and Deandro would agree with me on that, we work on systems wherein we see what is our perceived risk on the portfolio. And today, if the perceived risk goes up, obviously there will be internal mechanisms to curtail. But this thing is that, can we have a system which is more overhauled, which is more connected? The second thing is that, again, I'm just taking the same example just for the sake of simplicity. Direct escrow to the financer, or visibility to the financer in terms of operating parameters of the operator. Now, when we talk about life cycle financing, there is a fundamental difference, Vivek. The fundamental difference is that you are departing from fixed tenor loans to perpetual limits. And to give perpetual limits, you need to have information on perpetual basis. You cannot have disjointed information coming in. So that's another point which I thought I'll put in. Now, you are saying, can you get cheaper funds? Vivek, again, I have an issue. What is cheaper fund? Cheaper fund is a subjective issue. What is cheap? What is the interest rate in US or Canada versus India? Then you have to look at it in conjunction with the inflation. And also the currency forwards. right? But I think what is more important really is there is nothing which is cheap in this world. Now, how I can make funds to the end customer attractive? That is, I will only be able to do that if I'm able to bring down the inherent risk of funding a vehicle. And there are options available, but again, as Mr. Prasanna said, there are very few people who've got private equity, because for private equity, you need to have that skill set, that scale, that networking. Unfortunately, 90% of the bus operators are fragmented, unorganized. There you need to have a solution which is more localized, which is more aligned to the fragmented nature. So what I want to really talk about is maybe some other session, some other this thing, but we must work towards an ecosystem wherein there is a jointed effort. How many times a OEM would come and say that, boss, how much money you lost? Let's sit down and see what we can do. There are various ways. See, everyone has their own set of issues. And I'm not, OEM would have their own issues. The input prices, the cost is going up, the demand is not there, the capacity utilization is absolutely low. Operators have their own problem. SRTCs have their own problem. Similarly, financiers also have their problem. So unless and until we have a common platform wherein at least we empathize with each other and come that, take those 2 steps forward, we'll just be only discussing the problem. And today, the problem really is that the portfolio, which was one of the best portfolio in the automobile lending space, has become the worst performing portfolio by 10 times. And that's the reality. But customers are not bad. These are the customers who were paid in the past. There is a situational issue. So some of the banks are looking at it in a different manner, that it is situational. It is not willful default. It is a situational default. So I think there is a lot of reforms which are required. The way the tenders are given, the way the contracts are awarded. I think if one gets some kind of this thing clarity there going forward, I think that will open up huge surge.
Thank you, sir. So I think to summarize, you're saying the institutional restructuring itself can de-risk for you a lot of the concerns that you have right now with the industry. But I'm guessing also that you meant the situational concern, you're referring to COVID, if I'm not wrong.
So I'm saying that while this has happened, but then again, I think every bank, is looking at how they can support the customer, because the customer is not a willful defaulter. In a situation like this, when the bus will not run, what will the operator do? I mean, it's an earning asset. A standing bus costs 2,500, 3,000 rupees to the operator, even if it is not going anywhere. You have per seat tax. How is that operator going to pay? So the only thing is that you have to give him time. But when you are giving him time, then the fresh purchases will take back seat, because he has to come back to his feet. So maybe Vivek, it is a transitionary this thing. Maybe in 6 months' time we will see a turnaround, and I can see public transport has already come back almost to about 80-90%. Tour and travel is back. Staff for non-service, which is manufacturing sector, was rocking. It has been doing well. The only problem was the services sector, staff transportation, and the education institutions, school bus and others. Those are the ones which are even today, have an issue. So I'm saying that these are all transitory. This thing, I'm extremely bullish about this sector. This sector has been one of the best performing sector, and this sector will remain the best performing sector even in the future. But I think this is the time when we should assimilate our thoughts and create some couple of reforms which can ensure that future contracts are given to the people who can handle it. Because half of the defaults are basically because of the lack of skill set at the operators end or high leverage. See, also I think it will be a mistake if you put the entire blame on COVID. Please understand that the majority of portfolios still behaved well. There must be something right, and I don't want to go to the various parameters of what has happened bad or what has happened wrong. But I think this is a time when we should say that structurally, can we say that the availability, the contract availability is to the people who really deserve or who are skillful or who have the experience. Yeah,
I understand Mr. Biju might have to leave. If he's on the call, I would like him to just provide closing comments. Maybe he's left. All right. If your point well taken, Mr. Mohan. I think there are certain larger considerations and concerns. We have, I think, seen tendencies towards the improvement of service providers itself with, gross cost contracting, for example, public-private partnerships coming together. So things are changing, but yes, they're just about, those changes are just about starting to happen. And so it will take some time before they start formalizing, ironing out all of the concerns that exist, like Mr. Patwagan also pointed out. But before we come back, I would like to go to both Leonardo and perhaps even Cecilia, to just maybe Leonardo first. You've heard what the concerns of an Indian financier has been in this case, and you've also heard how the sector looks like from Prasanna and from an STU's perspective as well. Have you seen any examples outside of India that have worked, that have been able to, iron out some of these concerns already, especially if you have some Latin American examples in mind? That would be useful.
Yeah, maybe I can go first. And I want to echo some of Mr. Mohan's comments as well as a financial, right? I think there is somewhat of a dysfunction way of working, right? Where the customers are left alone, we're left alone. There's no bridge to glue everything together. So I just wanted to echo that from a financial point of view. And that leads me to the next point, right? To your question, how do we make it work, right? And in other areas, and I think the bus market, quite frankly, is a difficult market anywhere you go, right? It doesn't matter if it's in India, if it's in Peru, wherever we go, it's a difficult market. It's an expensive barrier to get in. It's an expensive maintenance. You need qualified people to operate. As someone said earlier, we're driving people, right? It's people's lives that it's at our hands. So the only way that I believe it works is when there is a group type of work, right? Where the government, where the private sector, the OEMs, the financiers look at this in a whole holistic view, right? And that's where we look at some of the markets. Brazil is a good example in terms of public transportation in some major cities, right? Which the state, the city may have to work very closely with the OEM in order to find the right product at the right price, right? But at the same time, we have to make sure that the operators are actually being profitable, right? And I think that's one of the concerns that I see, and I don't have a lot of experience in India yet, as many of you do. But when we look at the customer financials, they're not very, very good, right? So to me, it's an underlying issue as we go into financing and the operation, we're not confident that they're driving efficiency in their operations. And therefore, how do we get the confidence that we're going to get the EMI payment? How do we get the confidence that the life cycle maintenance of the assets? I think that's one of those things that we get when it's done jointly through, say, a city and the OEM. When there is a maintenance contract, we know that our collateral, right? Because we are financing based on our collateral, and we want to make sure that our collateral is in good shape, it's being taken care of, and at the same time, the operators are having high uptime, right? So they're maintaining the buses properly, and therefore generating the revenue, and therefore paying our EMI, right? So it's a whole chain of events that I think it has to be coordinated. It shouldn't be just up to the bus operators or to the financials, right? I think it's a joint work that needs to be done. Those are my reflections there. I don't know, Cecilia, if you have anything else to add.
Yes, I can agree with you, and we see it as one of our mission to actually help in lowering the cost of financing the bus purchases. And by helping that way, we are also providing all the sections of society a better access to an efficient bus network, I can say. I also want to comment on commercial borrowing versus private equity. I think this is exactly where Business Sweden come into play, because we know how to do this. We know how to build the business case for this, and we also have the knowledge on how to present this to investor across the globe to generate the confidence needed in order to make loans at a more profitable rate. We also have the skill set to effectively change the mindset of the investors, how they look at the sectors. I think I can start saying that. I don't know if we have anything else that I should go into, Vivek.
Thanks, Cecilia. I think we haven't gone to Akash yet. And Akash, I think you would have a chance to kind of reflect on what you've heard already, but also to kind of look at a couple of challenges that we're seeing here. Number one, I think the operators itself and their financial concerns are worrying to the financier. You as an OEM are definitely better off. And the new models that for example, with the electric buses that's been adopted by the government, we've seen at least new models emerge where OEMs and operators have come together in a consortium of sorts to operate transport. Is Volvo Buses thinking? Are you thinking of these ways of operating? Because these new models might then, take care of some of the concerns, for example, that Mr. Mohan had talked about earlier. Your reflections, and of course, there's another question to you on how you're thinking about electric buses and CNG buses in the future.
Okay, thank you, Vivek. But I think let me just go back.
Akash, before you start, may I take the permission to leave? I had some other engagement, so it had been very, very useful and enriching discussions. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Vinod. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think from my point of view, first of all, let me say that what we've been out discussing here almost for 1.5 hours is the real state of affairs the bus industry is in today. I think we all, first of all, agree that public transport is important. You can keep on piling as many numbers of private transports, be it 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, or 4-wheelers, but at the end of the day, the congestion is increasing, the pollution is increasing, and a way out, end of the day, is public transport. And public transport being in many parts, metro being an important one, is today well funded, but that doesn't provide last mile connectivity. And that is where it is inevitable that the bus system has to work well, and that will be the lifeline of a city. So I would like to say that based on my global experience, if you go to places like Curitiba, if you now go to highly not populated places equivalent to Delhi, like Mexico, or if you go to nice cities in the world, Singapore or London, etc. What is common in all these places is that public transport system, be it on bus, metro, or a combination of both, works very well. Last mile connectivity works very well. And therefore, I think it's not only COVID which is taking this industry back. The industry has for a very long time has had a structural issue. And added on to that structural issue, what I have understood as an OEM, also as persons coming from the finance field have said here, our operators both from the institutional side as well as the private side have said here, is very much that the combination of structural and COVID actually has taken us down, and it will lead to recovery being delayed. On top of that, what's happened is that we have connectivity high on the agenda, we have autonomous high on the agenda globally, and in India, we also have electric high on the agenda. And therefore, there is a new playing field. So I think while a number of structural issues are not sorted out, but there is a new buzzword playing around in the public industry or public transport industry, and that's electric. So everybody tends to forget most of the industry, which is diesel, and look at electric. But be it electric or CNG or diesel, it will not sort itself out till some of the key issues are addressed. And that is why panel discussions like these in their own small way are very important, where people from different parts of the industry or industry leaders get to come together, speak to each other, get to understand each other. Because otherwise, as Indians, sometimes we culturally, and I'm going a little bit beyond an OEM comment now, but I think being in the bus industry, like many others here for over 30 years now, I do feel that sometimes we're only looking at the good ways and the quick fixes and the short-term ways to solve the solution. And I think that needs to change. But let's not forget that a large number of good things have happened. Mr. Prasanna Patwagan is an example in himself that after following up from some of us, including him and others, it has taken 15, 20 years for the bus industry to come together and form BOKI, Bus Operators Association. And I think, Mr. Prasanna, it was 2015 when this happened. Before that, everybody had fragmented voice. And like Mr. Amit also started to say that there are a large number of fragmented operators. Today, at least there is a body which is representing them and moving between the government. And I think bringing the permit, because we talked of taxes here and taxes in every state. And in the last 6 months, the government finally, with the help and the pressure from different bodies, including BOKI, which was very much working towards, is getting a permit which will allow buses to run all India from one place to another without paying taxes in every nook and corner of the country where they stop is excellent. This is what happened to the truck industry 12, 14 years back when the truck permit came. And that is happening to the bus industry. It still has its own challenges, but it's out as a gazette from the government. So there are a number of things happening, but I think what we need to continue to do together is very much request the government bodies talking together as a voice of, let's say, operators, financiers, OEMs, etc., to put some structural changes in place. And I think that in our industry, the dilemma comes in because the government is also in the business of running buses. So basically, if the government was only making policies as is done world over, and the operators were running, the OEMs were providing the products, the financiers were providing the finance for it, then the system works well. But today we have a situation where we have a lot of, or every single more or less state in India, which has its own state corporation, where they're trying to do a good job, but due to legacy and policies, the state corporations are not viable, a lot of them. And then we have the private business, which has a heavy load of policies and procedures, and therefore is more looking at working with these state corporations for PPP models, which I think is great. So I think we are going on a stage over these last 20, 25 years, where structurally some things are getting addressed, but the speed is not okay. We need to change the speed, and therefore dialogue like this is extremely important, so that we are frank to each other and we are not putting things in our drawers or under the table. So having said that, then I think as a OEM, we feel very clearly that there is a business case for India to have a very efficient public transport system. I mean, Mr. Prasanna said a lot of money, or it was somebody else who said a lot of money has gone into building the infrastructure. So the highways are ready now. What it needs is good quality products to run from one end to another. Even if it's challenging to have a speed limit of 80 kilometers for one of the safest brands and buses in the world from Volvo, for example. So I think that the opportunity there is great. The opportunity in cities with electric coming in, people are looking at it as a change in electric. And from my experience, I try to tell wherever I go. And we had this seminar on Goa, where the Ministry of Heavy Industries put the who's who, the SIAM, ACMA, all the bodies of India together. I said, first of all, the good thing was that people were starting to have a dialogue. That was 50% of the win, because we are all sitting in our own corners. The second thing is, with electric buses coming, it's not only a change in technology, it's also that the normal buses which were being given to public in the market for the last 30 years were buses costing 10 to 20 lakhs. An electric bus today costs 80 lakhs to 1 crore. And it's not only the electric driveline which is that costly, but most of those buses will be either 2 steps, or most of them will be low floor. They will have large windows. They will have USB sockets. So the change is not only in terms of electric, the change is also that all of a sudden people will have air suspension buses, they will have comfortable buses, and that will bring a big change on people being able to move in public transport. And I know that the government is working with KfW. It was mentioned that we have a 220 million euro loan for India. I think that is just peanuts, but anyway, it's a very good start. So for us, our viewpoint is that by putting in a VECV bus division together with one strong organization, 2 very strong brands, Volvo and Eicher, we can today give anything in the market on diesel or CNG or electric from 10 lakhs to 2 crores. So we are there for our customers, and this is also to give confidence to our finances, where at VEC we have very good relations, that we will have every product. It's not that a customer will have to buy fragmented products from different OEMs. One OEM will give all kinds of products. And it is with that bandwidth we are going forward, and we are putting and doing our own little role in the industry to be talking to everyone, to be creating a forum where from the smallest to the largest bus is available. So I think, as some of you rightly said, in 6 months, we expect the industry to be back. Hopefully school segment, hopefully IT service segment, staff segment is back, long distance is back, and there is more money being poured into city transportation segment. I hear that on the question of CNG, of course, it's in focus, electric is in focus, but the government is also working on a plan to provide a large amount of money for 109 cities of India based on diesel and CNG for transportation. So we are waiting for such policies to come back so that 30, 35-year-old buses could go out and new products can come in and give better possibility for all of us to work together and make this a success. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Akash. You did touch upon all the issues that almost summarizing to an extent what has happened today. But in closing of today's panel discussion, I would like to say just this, that I think we've all agreed in this panel discussion that public transport is important. It's not just public transport, it's bus transport as part of it that is also important, which has not got the attention that it needs. Especially if you compare it to a metro service, for example, which has got a few more perks in terms of the finance that it can, the rates at which it can be financed. The other end is that there are niggling issues for a financier in terms of the risks that they see while getting into this business itself, and that can be overcome by a lot of by us coming together for one to iron out a lot of these niggling smaller issues that need to change. But the good sign is that those changes are occurring now. The pathways to them are being set. We need to probably ride that momentum and make sure that it happens quickly. It happens now. The GCC contract, for example, is a good first step. We've seen industry coming together, industry players of different kinds, OEMs, operators, STUs coming together to provide service. We're seeing the national level action plan on buses, the scheme itself on buses that is trying to drive some of this into all of the cities that it's working with. So there are positive signs. There are reasons to be positive, and there's reason for us to all of us to prepare for a different future. And with that, I think lastly, I think the point that Akash did make, that it's good when we come together. It works when we come together, and there's more reasons for us to be talking about how we can do this. Make these reforms happen together, sitting with government, sitting with industry, sitting with financiers, and that's one of the ways that we can move this forward far faster than it would otherwise. So I think with that, I would like to wrap today's panel discussion itself. And I would like to invite for the vote of thanks, the Vice President and Business Head of Volvo Buses, Mr. Suresh. Go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Vivek, and hello and good afternoon, everyone. So we are now concluding this very exciting and insightful deliberations on sustainable financing, which is, of course, one of the most central aspect of public transport progress. As we will see this finding its traction in the coming years. For us at Volvo Buses, as part of e-commercial vehicles now, Nobel Week seminars on sustainability has been otherwise a larger format. This event has been done typically face-to-face with interactions and engagements, which obviously was not possible in the current context of pandemic. But then we decided after a short gap that it is important to do it, and that is how this virtual format was designed. And we are all very happy to see this, the way discussions have gone there today. And this has been very engaging and brought a lot of insight in all the areas of financing connected to public transport. And for that, on behalf of e-commercial vehicles and Volvo Buses, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation to each one of you for making this webinar a success. Our deepest thanks to Mr. Gautam Bhattacharya from Embassy of Sweden in India, Mr. Vinod Agarwal, MD and CEO of e-commercial vehicles, for presenting the keynote addresses, and thank you for setting the stage with your inspiring opening comments and keynote addresses. You brought attention to all the clear challenges and potential exciting opportunities that lay ahead of us in the public transport area when it comes to buses in specific. We then had a most engaging panel discussion from each of our speakers and panelists on the key topic, and that has lent a very credible and expert voice on how they see things unfolding in the industry and as the industry addresses the growth challenge in the public transport. I offer on behalf of all of us here sincere thanks and appreciation to each of the distinguished panelists for sharing their knowledge and insights and being very open with their comments with respect to their specific areas. The list, Cecilia Oskarsson from the Business Sweden and Trade Commissioner of Sweden to India, Mr. Biju Prabhakar, who's left the meeting for another meeting, Secretary of Transport from Kerala government and also CMD of Kerala Road Transport Corporation, Mr. Prasanna Patwagan, President, Bus Owners Confederation of India, Mr. Amit Mohan, Joint President, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Mr. Leonardo Negro, Managing Director, Volvo Financial Services in India, and last but not the least, Mr. Akash Pasi, President of VECV Bus Division. So thank you for your immense value that you have brought in onto this panel discussion today. I also want to thank Vivek Chandran, Associate Director of Shakti Foundation, for moderating the webinar and the panel discussion so effectively. And finally, before I sign off, and most importantly, I want to thank all the members of the audience, customers from both the government and the private side, and also the government agencies, NGOs, non-profit organizations, which are all essential stakeholders in this area, for taking the time out today for making this webinar a success, and also making it possible for these strong voices to be heard. We will in future also continue with these series of webinars on the Nobel Week in coming years, and hopefully will return to the larger format as soon as possible. So on behalf of all of us at VE Commercial Vehicles and Volvo Buses, a big thank you and namaste to all of you.